By the late 1980s, He-Man's star was fading. Although the franchise had hit the height of its success in 1985, the live-action movie only made a modest sum, which really signaled that the toy line had come to the end of its limelight days, as new toy trends were hitting the market and TV screens. At the turn of the 90s, Mattel decided to reinvent He-Man with a new series of toys and a new cartoon. However, as Filmation had already closed their doors, their final product being a 1989 unofficial movie sequel to Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs called Happily Ever After, it was up to a new studio, Jetlag, to produce a new show, The New Adventures of He-Man. And indeed, New Adventures was a very different beast from He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, whereas Filmation's He-Man and She-Ra shows were some of the last 100% American-made cartoons at a time when animation outsourcing was becoming more commonplace. Jetlag's He-Man cartoon did things differently. The animation was done internationally, in large parts of it in Asia, and the voice cast was entirely Canadian. In fact, the only remnant of the Filmation show were the composers Shuki Levi and Haim Saban, who had become industry go-to composers for cartoons thanks largely to He-Man. The premise of the show sets it in the future on a planet called Primus, which is facing a constant attacks from an evil mutant army. I wonder what Professor X would have to say about this. With their shields failing, the Primus Elder and the scientists send Captain Hydran and Flipshot into the past to the world of Eternia to find a legendary hero to defend Primus. Of course, they first bump into Skeletor, who tries to convince the heroes he's the legendary hero, and they're led along until He-Man shows up and confronts them. A lot of them wind up in the time machine. Skeletor ditches the heroes when the mutants make another attack, and He-Man finally reveals himself to be a hero. As Adam, he now hides as a merchant to protect his identity, while Skeletor goes on to join the mutants and begins helping them out in their conquest of Primus. So right from the get-go, this series abandons Eternia as a setting, introduces a new cast, and basically puts He-Man in the position of a fish out of water. It's definitely a new, fresh take on the character, and I can definitely see what they were trying to do. Having said that, New Adventures has become much maligned in the He-Man fan community, and I think I can see why. It's a little too different from what we're used to seeing. Looking past the changed art style, the show does seem to set itself up as a follow-up to the Filmation show. We see Adam revealing his secret identity to King Randor and Queen Marlena, and the sorceress keeps giving He-Man advice from the past, somehow. But the feeling of the show is very much more science fiction oriented, which I don't mind, but it's now completely void of the fantasy feeling, which is also part of He-Man, and which is why I think the show may start to feel like just a generic action-adventure cartoon. He-Man again is the obvious topic, and notably, he doesn't look nearly as barbaric as in the Filmation show. I don't really mind the redesign since he is in a sci-fi environment, but I can understand why he and Adam still look practically identical. On the Filmation show, it was a cost reduction thing, since they could reuse He-Man and Adam's animation cells, but here there's literally no good reason why the characters are so physically similar. I do like that they still acknowledge Eternia with He-Man changing his transformation call from By the Power of Grayskull to By the Power of Eternia. Also, He-Man's voiced by the excellent Gary Chalk.
By the power of Eternia?
So he at least comes off very heroic. Adam, however, is voiced by Doc Parker, better known as Mega Man from Captain N. In fact, there's a lot of Captain N alumni in the voice cast, though here Parker is just using his normal speaking voice. However, what I can understand is why Chalk, who is an actor with quite a bit of range, couldn't just do both roles. Also, I do think the scriptwriters went a little over the top with his dramatic dialogue, and almost every episode ends with Chalk going on a cheesy tangent about the power of the good and the way of the magic. But at least he fights Skeletor a lot more on this show than the Filmation cartoon, and that's one genuine improvement. His sword has a bit of a She-Ra complex, and there's a lot of episodes where it works as an all-purpose Deus Ex Machina. I get it, He-Man's sword is awesome, but I think it gets a little silly when the heroes are saved by the power of backlighting. Skeletor is probably one of the most controversial aspects of New Adventures, and you can all see why. He has eyeballs. Sure, it was okay for Frank Langella, they couldn't really hide it, but admittedly in New Adventures, Skeletor looks really silly when you first see him. His outfit seems to consist of a cape and a pilot's cap for some reason. Then 5 episodes in, he transforms and gets a goofy headpiece, which almost feels like it's trying to imitate Skeletor's God mode from the movie. Then there are occasions when he takes the helmet off, and we get a really disturbing look at the back of his head. However, physical attributes aside, this version of Skeletor is pretty cool in the way he doesn't immediately assume control of the mutant forces, but rather uses them for his own ends. It's a much more low-key Skeletor, but I think Campbell Lane did a fantastic job with all his sarcastic dialogue.
They've begun firing! No! Whatever makes you think that? It's almost enough to make even me smile.
Did I tell you to smile? You don't breathe unless I tell you to. In fact, stop breathing. Just to show you what a good mood I'm in, you may breathe.
Where he may not look very awesome, he's actually the highlight character for me, and I just love seeing what he's planning behind everyone's backs. The only weird thing about Campbell's voice performance is that he puts a lot of stress on the H in He-Man, and as a result, it kinda sounds like he's just saying She-Man.
He-Man, 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 He-Man.
As for the other new characters, I think my favorites are on the villain's side. The heroes just aren't very interesting, though Hydrant and Flipshot are still pretty likable characters. In the second season episode Balance of Power, Mara, the show's female lead, finally steps up to become the queen of these weird head creatures called the Galactomites. So at least some of the good guys get to stand out to some extent. However, my favorite new characters are the evil mutants, mainly because they're all such goofballs. Flog is the leader of the mutants, a complete nitwit who mostly follows Skeletor, doesn't catch on to his sarcastic praise, but who also loses his patience with him from time to time. I actually sympathize with him more than any other characters, since it is Skeletor's plans that usually backfire on him. Then there's Slushhead. He sings, occasionally. I don't know whether I love it or hate it.
There's something about someone running to hide that just brings out the evil inside.
And can you believe it? There's actually a character called Butthead. And Skeletor has a little doggy called Grr. And there is a girl mutant called Critta, but she doesn't really do much. Other henchmen also get to shine on an episode-by-episode basis, but there aren't that many characters I really love. And as for original He-Man characters, only He-Man, Skeletor, and the Sorceress appear regularly. Teela does get one episode cameo, but she doesn't get to do anything noteworthy, which just makes it a complete waste. Also, she apparently went blonde for some reason. It may sound like I'm not really thrilled about the show, but it is actually really impressive in certain aspects. On average, the animation quality is far better than in the Filmation show, and there definitely is a lot of action in every single episode. Also, the show has a continuous storyline, which is kind of impressive, although it also means that the show isn't meant to be watched on a simple episode-by-episode basis. I think I would like it a lot better if I could just sit down and watch the whole thing from start to finish, because jumping around from episode to episode to make this review kinda left a mixed impression. Here's the gist of it. If you're okay with a very different version of He-Man, enjoy the characters and the heightened action content, then you'll probably like New Adventures. But if you're very attached to the Filmation show, as I admittedly am, you're going to find the show a little too alien and thus not as enjoyable. What I'm stressing is that just because the show hasn't really made an impact with me, it's still a good cartoon in its own right, but admittedly I just find myself preferring the Filmation version. But if you're feeling adventurous, give it a try. And that's all from me for now. Next time we'll jump straight into the early 2000s remake of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. Until then, I have the power, so can you. He-Man.